Last year, our eventual national champion started the season outside of the AP Top 25, while the team ranked first didn't even make the tournament. Who is going to be this year's UConn and North Carolina?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey folks, welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a 5 times per week national college hoop show, part of course of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. And today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Happy Monday, friends. Happy Monday, Isaac. We got ourselves a fun show today here talking about who might be this year's UConn and this year's North Carolina.
I love it, man. It's such a fun show. I love it.
Yeah, right? It's going to be a blast. And we'll talk a little bit about what those definitions mean. But really, of course, UConn was a team that came out of not nowhere last year. They were a highly regarded team throughout the season, but they were not a top 25 team when the year began. And of course, they won the national championship. Meanwhile, North Carolina, very famously, very historically, was out of the top 25 very shortly after starting the season number 1 overall, fails to make the NCAA tournament. Not likely that both these two scenarios will happen once again in the 2023-24 season, but if it were, we're going to discuss which teams might be in that conversation. And Isaac, as you have it in the notes here, it definitely surprised me too. I texted you. It's surprising to me that UConn wasn't a top 25 team last year. Like, we knew that they were, that they had the talent and had them projected 4th, 5th in the Big East, and that they finished 4th in the Big East and still just went on that massive run in the NCAA tournament. But really surprising to see a team outside the top 25 every year. It seems like there's no way that one of these teams isn't going to be the one that wins it all. But that happens. It happens. And heck, there's a chance it's going to happen this year. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Oh, I mean, like, history tells us it will happen this year, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm really curious to see how it unfolds. It's always funny when we sit and try to prognosticate it, especially this day and age where roster turnover and turnaround is so great. But that's what makes this fun, is trying to figure it all out. Also, while I'm talking, folks, you got to know how much your man Andy Patton loves you. He literally has just put a fantasy football draft on auto draft.
I did.
To record this podcast right now. My man is in to win.
I made sure I got my running backs, my receivers, my flex, and then I'm out. We're good after that. So hopefully the rest of the thing comes together okay.
You really should have gotten a kicker before you left.
We'll see what happens there.
Oh, that's good.
Isaac, I have 2 teams that I want to discuss here.
Okay.
And I should say we're going off of ESPN's August 1st, 2023 top 25 rankings. These are not the AP top 25 rankings. These are probably not even the most updated ESPN top 25 rankings.
They are. I made sure to get the most updated.
They are the most updated, but I mean, Jeff Borzello, the writer, might have changed some things.
Oh, I see.
They're a couple weeks old at this point.
Yes.
They're not necessarily our top 25, although I feel pretty confident that this is generally the top 25 teams. But there was a couple teams that kind of stood out to me that I wanted to talk about. And the first one is a team that is genuinely not in the rankings, but did get, at least according to Jeff, the author of the ESPN article, were kind of in his receiving votes category, which is where UConn fell last year. So there's some similarities there. And that's the Florida Gators, Todd Golden's Florida Gators squad. It would be really fun to see if Todd could lead that team back to the promised land. Of course, Florida has a couple of national championships in this millennium, but not in a very long time. And the SEC, very, very tough conference. And I think Kentucky is going to be solid this year. We've talked a lot about them on this show. Alabama and Arkansas, we'll see what their kind of revamped rosters look like. Of course, Tennessee in there as well. But this has been a really, really good and I think somewhat understated offseason for Todd Golden. For starters, they get Riley Kugel back, and Riley Kugel is expected to be like a guy who might jump into the lottery next year as a sophomore. He had a really, really good end of the season last year for the Gators, and I think there's a real possibility that he blossoms into one of the better players in all of college basketball next season. So if you get that from a guy returning to your team, that's a huge boost. But beyond that, they also add Walter Clayton out of Iona in the transfer portal. They add Micah Handlogden out of Marshall, a big man, two of the premier transfers in the portal. According to Evan Miyakawa's website, evanmiya.com, he ranks all of the transfers based on some of the advanced analytics that he uses. And he had Walter Clayton as the 9th most valuable transfer and Handlogden as the 13th most valuable transfer. 2 top 15 guys coming to Florida. They add EJ Jarvis from Yale. He was ranked 53rd. Tyrese Samuel from Seton Hall was 95th. 4 top 100 transfers coming to Todd Golden's squad. They have a up-and-coming player in Riley Kugel. They have an SEC that to me feels more wide open just because of the roster attrition we saw at Kentucky, because Alabama lost, the key talents on their roster from last year. Arkansas, I think, is going to be good, but there's some question marks around that team and some question marks around Tennessee as well. So to me, Florida has an opportunity to really make some noise in the SEC. They'll play some really tough teams. Todd Golden's got to prove that he can coach in the NCAA tournament. He's only coached 1 game there so far while he was at San Francisco. But to me, this is a team that has a lot more potential than I think. They kind of flew under the radar this offseason. I think there's a chance they could really make some noise this year.
Man, how funny would it be in a year after Colin Castleton leaves if they just all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, Florida's awesome now. And I think it being Todd Golden's second, there's just something to a coach getting some more experience and some more time with that. So that wouldn't shock me at all. Andy, let me give you my first team, and then we can look at ones that maybe are some runners up or others that we're looking at. I really waffled here between like Illinois. I look, getting Terrence Shannon back, looking at Quincy Guerrier, Coleman Hawkins coming back. I thought even about UCLA, and I know that sounds kind of weird, but you look at somebody like a Dembona, if he can just step up and be an absolute dude.
Yeah.
But the team I went with that's outside of Jeff Borzillo's top 25. Again, we won't get the AP preseason top 25 till mid-October sometime. So we're doing the best we can here. I'm going to go with Kansas State. And Andy, I honestly think this is almost as much about Jerome Tang as it is the guys who are playing for him.
Yeah.
Had done so much for so long at Baylor and finally getting his shot and made the most of it last year. Now, the question is, can you have a dynamic duo, somebody like Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson? Does somebody spring and surprise you like that? I don't know if that can happen. But, I mean, I just look at some of these names like Quez Glover, who just recently came over just last week, Tyler Perry, Arthur Kaluma coming over from Creighton. You've got Naquan Tomlin in the front court along with him. David Gasson, who's been there, transferred over from Virginia Tech a while ago. I just like if one of those like if Perry or Glover or even somebody else could jump out and be that Marquise Noel type game manager distributor. And if Tomlin or Kaluma could really turn into the level that Keontae Johnson was, and still what the coolest story in the world with Keontae Johnson, then Kansas State could really make some noise. And when you're in a conference like the Big 12, where you are really tested by the fire and tried, you just, it really refines these teams in ways that allows them to make the most of what they could be that nobody else even might really realize while you're in the midst of conference play. So give me some K-State.
I love it. And to me, like, I don't think Tyler Perry and Arthur Kaluma are Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson, specifically because Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson are very, very unique, and it's very difficult to replicate them. But it's also not crazy to see some similarities with those two players. Is it going to work exactly the same for Jerome Tang? Hard to say. Probably not as effective, but if the supporting cast ticks up a bit, if they're a little bit more prepared for the Big 12 this year, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Isaac, I got another team I want to pick here, and they are not outside the top 25. They're just inside the top 25, but in the spirit of the exercise,
I'll allow it because I've got one that's the same
Perfect. The other team I want to talk about is St. Mary's, the Gales, Randy Bennett's squad here. I think we talk a lot about continuity being a key factor in preseason rankings and kind of our perceived value of teams as the season begins. And St. Mary's has a lot of it. They lose Kyle Bowen, which is a really tough loss for them. They lose Logan Johnson, which is a really tough loss for them, but they get back Mitchell Saxon. They get back Aiden Mahaney, who's going to be a significant household name this year for those who are not already familiar with him. They get back Augustus Marcelonis. They get back Alex Dukas. And I think that this is a team that they didn't make a ton of splashy additions, but Randy Bennett always likes to find his guys. And if he went out and found a few players to replace the guys that they lost who fit his system and play his defensive intensity and play his slow plodding offensive kind of very efficient, but not exactly moving quick style of offense, like I could see it. Like St. Mary's has been on the cusp of being a team that could make a legitimate run, and they haven't quite done it yet. But Aiden Mahaney is the kind of point guard who can be that guy who can lead your team all the way to a Final Four. And this roster looks like the kind of roster that is going to give Gonzaga heck in the WCC and could push for a legitimate Sweet 16, Elite 8, maybe even farther berth in the Big Dance.
Somebody's going to have to push them because BYU ain't there to do
exactly.
I'll tell you that. Okay, Andy, what's funny, the Gales 23rd in ESPN's latest Way Too Early Top 25. Right behind them at 24 are the Texas Longhorns. Rodney Terry taking over. You love to see it. Now, Andy, this starting five, I think, is going to be, or who we project to be the starting five, I think is going to be awesome. Tyrese Hunter coming back, Max Asmus coming over from Earl Roberts. I think he will translate. I'm not really worried. A scorer is a scorer. Dylan Mitchell, got to watch for him to take a big step forward. But down the stretch, you and I talked about this a ton last year. Dylan Dessou, like we thought was the best player on the team down the stretch last year. And then Caden Shedrick coming over from Virginia. And I want to remember, like we've talked a lot about, like, there's not too terribly much depth beyond that starting five, but brought in Chris Johnson, right, who was initially a Kansas transfer. And so if he can do anything for Coach Terry there, and that is something we'll have to watch, right, is now that this is the first full year without with Coach Terry taking over, what does that look like, right? Like last year, there's rally the troops, here we go, let's play for each other. Can they do that again? I don't know. We'll find out. But I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Texas rise to the top of the Big 12 along with Kansas and Houston. All right, so Mr. Andy, from the team that went from unranked to national champion, let's discuss the team that went from AP preseason number 1 to straight up missing the tournament. Who is going to be this year's UNC? We'll talk about it in just a second. But first, I need to tell you that today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's easy to create a free job post, and then you just add that purple hashtag hiring frame to your profile to spread the word to everyone that you're hiring. After that, you can use simple tools like screening questions to make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skill set and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you want to interview and then ultimately hire for your job. And let's be honest, the right team member, they really can have a positive and measurable impact on your business. This is why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number 1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Once again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, thanks so much for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen or watch of the day. You everydayers, man, we know that you're right here with us. If you're new to the show, welcome. It's late August. Maybe you're starting school or your kids are starting school. Hope that goes well. Today's the first day of school for my kids. So, man, hope it's a great school year. If you need a show to listen to while you're driving your kids to school, hop on in Locked On College Basketball every day. It's going to be another great week. Okay, Andy, We just talked about who is this year's UConn, the team that goes from unranked preseason to national champ. Wow, what wacky. In the same vein, we want to like flip that and say, who's the team that goes from highly ranked preseason to not even making the 2024 NCAA tournament? And Andy, let's be fair about it. Ain't nobody going to be the preseason number one and then miss the tournament, because it had never happened before last year. We expect Kansas to be preseason number one. I don't see a world in which they don't make the NCAA tournament unless an earthquake swallows up Lawrence, Kansas or something between now and March. But let's have a conversation that kind of works in that vein. Now, as we just talked about, we don't have the AP preseason top 25 yet, so we're going to continue to use that ESPN. So let me give you the top 15 teams in their latest top 25. I'll go from 1 to 15. And then, Andy, we want to pick a team that we think might not land in the tournament when it's all said and done. Here we go. Kansas, Duke, Purdue, Michigan State, UConn, Houston, Gonzaga, Tennessee, Florida Atlantic, Marquette, Arizona, San Diego State, Creighton, Arkansas, and those same North Carolina Tar Heels. Andy, out of that list, who's someone you think, this team ain't making the tournament?
Man, this is a good list of programs, and I think one thing that we've seen a lot, and that I kind of want to address here when I pick the teams that I'm going to talk about, is preseason rankings, especially the last couple of years, really value continuity, and it's totally logical. As people, ourselves who do rankings, and knowing other people in the industry who do rankings, teams are changing over their rosters in tremendously significant ways. And Kansas is going to show up the number one because of additions that they made. It's not just continuity for Kansas. They get in Hunter Dickinson, they get in Arterio Morris, etc. But for a lot of these teams, the main reason that they are regarded so highly is because they have mostly the same starters from last year. That's true of Duke. That's true of Purdue. That's true of Michigan State, which are 2, 3, and 4. That's true of FAU. That's one of the biggest reasons that they're on this list. That is something that is being really valued right now. And when you look at what happened with North Carolina, they brought back 4 starters. They brought back one guy who they needed to replace in the starting lineup. They brought in Pete Nance to replace Brady Manek. Everybody thought that's going to work just as well as it did with Manek. We're just going to roll with that. And obviously things did not go well for North Carolina last year. Nobody could have predicted that the Nance relationship, that it would go as poorly as it did, that he would be that different from the way that Manek fit into that offense. But I want to pick a team that is somewhat similar. And so I'm going to pick the team that finished as the national championship runner-up last year, the same way North Carolina did. And I'm going to pick the Aztecs of San Diego State. Now, nobody has San Diego State number one. I don't think very many places have them top 5. And frankly, I'm not sure. I think they're 11th or 12th on this list, and that's probably about right, or probably about as high as I think you're going to see them. But this is a team that, they bring back Lamont Butler. They bring back Darion Trammell. They're bringing back some of the key pieces to this team, but they lose Matt Bradley, who was their leading scorer last year. They lose Keshad Johnson, who transfers to Arizona. He was a big part of what that team did, particularly on the defensive end of the floor. And so to me, I think we're kind of operating under a similar assumption of, Reese Dixon-Waters, the guy that transfers from USC, was the Pac-12 Sixth Man of the Year last year. He's going to fill into that kind of Matt Bradley role. Matt Bradley was a Cal transfer himself, and maybe he will. Reese Dixon-Waters is really good. I'm not doubting that necessarily. But I think that just assuming, this team's got a couple of starters back, they're going to plug and play the other spots, it's going to be exactly the same, and they're going to go on the same kind of run, I'm not as sure. Now, San Diego State has the advantage of being in the Mountain West as opposed to the ACC, which is a little bit more difficult if your team does flounder a little bit. But also San Diego State, if you lose a couple non-conference games that you shouldn't lose, and a few teams in the Mountain West don't do what they're supposed to do, maybe Boise State stumbles, maybe New Mexico kind of falls off a cliff a little bit, and suddenly the Mountain West doesn't look so good. San Diego State's got 3 or 4 non-conference losses. All of a sudden you find yourself on the bubble. It doesn't take much. It really doesn't take a whole lot if you're a mid-major program, even an elite mid-major program, the way that San Diego State is. If I was a betting man, I'm still betting on them to make the NCAA tournament. But if I'm looking at this group of 15 schools, it's not that hard for me to see a few things going wrong down in San Diego for this team to suddenly find themselves on the bubble instead of a secure spot in the NCAA tournament.
Yep. And what's funny, Andy, is the team that I have selected is essentially in the same boat.
Mhm.
I'm gonna
Oh, I know
go.
who it is then.
I hate it. I don't want to say this, but it's Florida Atlantic.
Yeah.
And listen, let me give you the things that make it seem like, yeah, I should go for them. They won 35 games. They made the Final Four, and that's kind of where it's different from North Carolina is because when they had that good run the year before, it wasn't necessarily a great regular season before they beat Coach K in Cameron, and then just kind of from there they were off and running. Florida Atlantic had a really, really good year last year in Conference USA. They get back all 5 starters: Nick Boyd, Brian Greenlee, and a couple guys I really love, and John L. Davis and Elijah Martin. Like Elijah Martin's athleticism, dude, is just awesome. And then everybody's favorite big man, Vlad Golden. Like, right? Like, it's so cool. Dusty May getting all the love and shine, and I love that. But I know going from Conference USA to AAC is a step up, although AAC just lost a bunch of schools to the Big 12, right? And there's just similar to what you said about the Mountain West Conference. It's a very, very similar thing. Like there's just not as much margin for error as you would have, let's say, in the Big 12, where just about every night you're playing a quad 1 game. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure on Florida Atlantic to repeat. And like, man, I hate it, but the way people look at the AAC versus the ACC or Big 12 or Big 10 or SEC, whatever it is, they're not going to get as much love and opportunity. So they got to be right there on top of it. There's not as many slots coming out of the AAC into the tournament. And so Florida Atlantic is just going to have to stay right on top of it. And while they don't have to replace, in the same way that San Diego State is, as the same way North Carolina did last year, the pieces around those starters are going to have to be right there. And then, does all that click and work the same way? But quickly, if I had to give you a major conference team, Andy, I bagged on them all last year. I said literally last week, I was not bagging on them this year, but Tennessee, very quickly, here's why. The Chris Ledlam, decommits. Zakai Ziegler's health worries me a lot. Is he going to be himself? He is the engine that makes this thing go. Does Dalton connect? Does it translate from Northern Colorado? I think it will, but we got to watch that. And then I think losing Olivier Kamwa is going to be a bigger deal than people think it is, especially thinking about how this team defends and for Rick Barnes. And so we got to watch that, especially with, as you said, kind of a wide open SEC, but there are also a lot of good teams. I could see Tennessee, if some of those pieces fall the wrong way, they might fall off.
So, yeah, 100%. I think that's a good pick. I think FAU makes sense, even though it is kind of sad. And very quickly, before we move on, I wanted to throw out another high major team. And I'm going to say this as explicitly as I can. I do not think that Duke is actually going to miss the NCAA tournament. I don't think that. I want that to be the first thing said. However, there are some similarities to this Duke team and last year's North Carolina team. It's kind of sputtering up and down regular season. Duke didn't go on quite as good of a run in the NCAA tournament, of course, as North Carolina did, but a lot of the hype around Duke this year is who they're getting back. Kyle Filipowski comes back. Mark Mitchell comes back. Tyrese Proctor comes back. Jeremy Roach comes back. You have 4 returning starters. 5th starter is Jared McCain. Is he going to come into the starting lineup? Like, how are they going to shake that out? It depends what John Shire wants to do. I worry a little bit.
Is he going to be the 5th starter? That's what I'm curious to see.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But for Duke,
like, can Flip be a center?
Right. That's the biggest question. Can Flip be a center? Who's going to protect the rim? What does that look like defensively? Losing somebody like Derek Lively is really, really tough. Like, again, is Duke going to miss the tournament? I wouldn't bet any money on it. I really wouldn't. But I wouldn't be shocked if Duke finds themselves outside of the top 10 within the first couple of weeks of the season and kind of hangs out in the 10, the 15, 20, 25 range, maybe even farther than that. Like, I think it's possible that they struggle enough to like be a borderline ranked team. Again, they're still probably going to make the dance, but we're making a lot of assumptions around Duke, and the upside for this team is sky. I mean, the upside for this team is a truly dominant basketball program that wins the NCAA tournament. They could be that good, but there's also a lot of things that could go wrong.
The Champions Classic is going to be awesome. Yes. Them and Michigan State, and then Kansas against Kentucky. Oh, man. Boy. Gosh, I can't wait. Okay.
Well, Isaac, a not-so-secret scrimmage is going to take place in Champaign, Illinois, between Kansas and Illinois. We're going to talk about why that game is happening and why we think more things like this should continue to happen for the sport of college basketball. All that coming up right after this. All right, folks, segment 3 here, Locked on College Basketball. Still Andy Patton, still joined by my co-host Isaac Shade, and we are going to close out today's show talking about a secret scrimmage. And this is kind of one of the biggest talking points that always comes up in August, in September. Who's played a secret scrimmage? Who already played a secret scrimmage? What are the results? Does anybody know? How'd so-and-so look? And it's like, I mean, it's a ritual, a college basketball ritual. But we've seen some transitions away from making them as secret. More teams are more willing to televise them. Gonzaga and Tennessee played one televised last year, and Gonzaga got their bell rung, which is like what teams are afraid of when they do this, is they don't want to be seen like that. But it's good for the sport. Now, Kansas and Illinois, the situation here is they are playing a secret scrimmage. They're changing it to a public scrimmage in Champaign. They are using the proceeds to go towards relief in Maui because, of course, devastating fires in the Lahaina area in Maui. They're going to impact the Maui Invitational. It's been, last time we spoke about it on the show, I think there was a death count under 100. It sounds like it's significantly more than that. It's a really horrific and tragic event in one of the most beautiful areas in the entire country. And we're going to post links in the show notes to potentially help out for anybody who has already helped out and wants to continue, who is interested in helping out, whatever it may be. Of course, no pressure or anything on that. But what I love about this is that Kansas and Illinois are willing to make their scrimmage game public and televised in order to help raise funds for people who really need it. To me, that is fundamentally what college athletics are about. You want to be, it's for the students, it's for the fans, but it's also for helping people and bringing things together. And I think for Kansas and Illinois to take an opportunity to let something that could have been private, that didn't have to be visible to other people, that might give, scouting insights or showcase, hey, this is, we're still really working on things on the defensive end of the floor, and it showed in this scrimmage game or whatever it might be. Like, you're willing to put those things out there in order to make your product more accessible for fans, which is fundamentally a huge thing that college basketball should continue to be doing as much as possible. But beyond that, you're raising money for people who need it, which again is really admirable. And I'm happy this game is happening.
Yeah, for those who aren't aware, every team gets 2 of something, whether it's public exhibition games like against a D2 school or 2 secret scrimmages or 1 of each. That's what everyone's able to do. And so I love that these teams are taking the opportunity to do this. There was, Andy, I don't know if you had seen it as I was kind of looking around on this. I think it was yesterday. The schools had both posted a video of Coach Self and Coach Underwood. Obviously it's staged, but it was just neat, them talking back and forth about this and how both schools have been out to Maui for the Maui Invitational and how it impacted them and how they wanted to be able to give back. And I love the willingness, like you were saying, of teams to say, dude, screw the potential for competition to see what we're doing, and let's just play basketball and help people. And that's what people want, and people are going to flock to this game because it's the probable preseason number 1 team going to another team's home arena. And this Illinois team, as we talked about earlier, is one that I'm considering as like they could make some real noise in the Big Ten this year. And so that should be really fun. Obviously, it's Coach Self going back to Illinois, where he previously was before the whole carousel when Roy Williams went to North Carolina. Bill Self comes to Illinois, or comes to Kansas. Did Bruce Weber go to Illinois at that point? Yes, he did. And then they were in the national championship game against Carolina in 2005. That's a funny circular moment. But more like I love the taking care of people's side of this, but let's use this as a jumping off point to say, Andy, more of this, please. Whether it is doing it for community things, which I would be always in favor of, right? Like, let's get 2 teams together for their secret scrimmage for a cause, give all the money to somebody, and like how that just helps college basketball so much. But people just crave this and they want more of it, more of it.
Well, I think too, like again, I mentioned in Gonzaga and Tennessee, they did a scrimmage last year, and that game was on pay-per-view, which was bizarre. And people had theorized that perhaps Gonzaga was attempting to gather some TV data information, like, hey, this many people in Texas or this many people in this place bought pay-per-view, maybe to sell that to the Big 12. Hasn't worked up to this point yet, but there's some theories that might have been the case. But another thing that Gonzaga did last year in the game that they played against Baylor, not a scrimmage game, a regular game, but it was on Peacock, and all of the student athletes through an NIL deal were able to make money off of that game. I don't necessarily think that selling games as individual packages like Peacock or pay-per-view is a good idea necessarily. But if we're not going to do these secret scrimmages for charity, which is always the number one option, as you said, I think that is the preferred way to do this. Finding ways to do it as an NIL opportunity for student athletes isn't a bad idea either, because it's another way, again, especially for maybe mid-major schools or schools that aren't generating as much income, to schedule a secret scrimmage or to make a scrimmage public, have it be an NIL deal where your student athletes are getting a little profit out of it. That kind of thing can't hurt either. Bottom line, I want college basketball to be seen by more people. I want it to be more visible. I want teams to be more willing to put their product on TV in front of people in live situations, whatever it may be, because I love this game and you love this game. And if you're listening to this podcast right now, you probably love this game too, because you're listening to a college basketball podcast in the third week of August. So to me, I think growing the game in that way is a relatively easy way for college coaches to kind of gain some goodwill and, gain some positive press if they're doing it for charity, and also just put your product in front of more eyeballs, because every single time you host a game and a family comes to your game, a little kid falls in love with college basketball. And the more times you do that behind a closed door, you lose those opportunities.
Yeah. And this game, as a reminder, October 29th, which is a Sunday, right? Yeah. That's pretty wild. So that'll be just right before, like a week before the season starts. I believe the first games are Monday, November 6th. And so that'll be a nice little tasty thing. So Andy, I can't agree and nod my head with you enough. More basketball, more basketball, more basketball. Let's just make this as 12 months a year as we can. Yes. Steal back some from college football. Take that. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in with us today to kick off a brand new week here on Locked On College Basketball. Always great to be back together. I will have shows the next couple days. Andy's going to be back with you on Thursday and Friday of this week. You can follow us on Twitter at Andy Patton CBB, me at Isaac Shade, and the show at Locked On CBB. I guess I need to add those 3 letters to the end of my name too. Hey, if you would go and subscribe to the show on audio and video format, smash the like button for those of you watching. And if you would, leave comments on your thoughts. Who did we get right? Who did we get wrong about this year's UConn and North Carolina? And tell us what you think about these secret scrimmages. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Go Wildcats. And until tomorrow, peace.